But just to introduce sort of why we were interested and what the genesis of this conversation was, we have an unusual governance system in that we have what a lot of other people would think of as delegates, but our delegates are not for voting. So our delegates are there to really deliberate and come up with informed recommendations about new proposals as they go through the governance process. So they do make recommendations. They're expected to reach consensus with each other, but those recommendations can go either way. And so all of that is a process that we have pretty well in hand. We're making some changes to it, but that process is pretty, it at least works, and we have a prototype for how it works, and we've used it for 26, 27 proposals so far, so that's pretty well worked out. What we're trying to figure out a solution for is this edge case where the process is working fine, there's nothing procedural that's gone wrong, so there's no need for dispute resolution in the sense that someone feels the process itself wasn't used correctly. But the issue is what happens if we reach an edge case where the token holders and our delegates, or we call them Sophons, can't reach agreement. So what happens in cases where they can't reach agreement? Because in our process right now, there's something called reconciliation, where if the process gets there, it's because they were unable to agree. And usually the 3 times it's happened, they've been able to reach social consensus, the Sophons and the token holders, but that's not always going to be the case. And so we're interested in finding some party external to those 2 groups that can step in and objectively make a decision in cases where they are in disagreement. And so Kleros courts came to mind, and that was the genesis of today's call. But I'd imagine maybe there are other areas of Kleros that are interesting. But yeah, maybe if you could start off by telling us about Kleros courts and how they might fit into this, or how jurors might be selected. Lots of questions about that, but I wanted to start hearing from you.
Yeah, well, okay, so some of the slides I prepared were actually a little bit outside the scope, since after hearing your use case, yeah, this is something perhaps I could just go through a bit of like a summary of the protocol itself, and then we can get into more of the governance decision sides.
Perfect.
All right. So for starters, I think the simplest way to understand Kleros is as an arbitration oracle. So the way it works is we're a DApp that can be, it's an opt-in solution. Any arbitrable application, which is any DApp that adheres to our ERC 792 standard, can point to us as the arbitrator to solve a number of disputes, from like e-commerce to freelancing, sports betting, and decentralized ratings agencies. We can pretty much fill all of those. But where I'd like to segue this into, okay, to touch on a little bit as well about how the juror process works. Our token PNK, that's used for staking in the Kleros court, and within the court, it's divided into several subcourts depending on specialization. So we try to make it so that there's always a subcourt to solve specific issues, whether that's in governance or in freelancing, whatever it may be. So for example, we have the general court where everyone stakes, and then that can be divided into, let's say, the blockchain court, and then the blockchain non-technical court, and the blockchain technical court. And so the reason why we have like a cascading effect where you need to have stake first in the general court and then the parent court of the subcourt, so like blockchain, you need to stake there to then stake into the blockchain technical, is to prevent 51% attacks and to make sure that our sortition algorithm is truly drawing jurors at random. So it's very unlikely, although there are some edge cases that we factored in, but for the most part, it's very unlikely that one juror or a group of jurors will be able to manipulate that cascading system in a way that they can always be drawn together to pass malicious rulings. And so there's a lot of game theory going on behind that. We have it so that it's permissionless as well for jurors, that you can stake in any court. So let's say I'm not a marketing expert, so if I were to stake in the marketing court, it would be economically unfeasible for me to stay there very long, because the way jurors who are on the right side basically are rewarded is from a slash portion of those on the opposing side.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's how we keep all the jurors in check without needing to verify any credentials or anything. And then moving on into the area of how this helps specifically with governance is using Kleros, pointing to us as an arbitrator to be an independent judiciary. And so a big a big thing for us is credible neutrality. That's why we have such a focus on like making sure that jurors are drawn at random,
Mhm.
making sure that there are no biases, no exclusions based on personal stuff or anything, to be a credibly neutral court. And this is especially important for insurance and governance use cases. So
Mhm.
just to go over the insurance a bit to give some context on the governance, the way DeFi insurance is done these days typically is an insurer makes a claim, and then the community will take a vote on whether to pay out the claim from the protocol's treasury. And then if that vote passes, then it goes to like what you'd call the executive team, or the ones who control the multisig. And if they refuse to like comply with the proposal that was passed by the community, then that causes some friction. And it can work both ways as well, like with the reverse agency problem, where the it could be a completely eligible insurance claim, and the executive team would be willing to release the funds to cover the claim, but the community, based on however, I mean, there can be collusion within a tight knit community. Maybe they'd be like, hey, we have a personal vendetta against this injury. Let's just make sure it doesn't pass to the multi-sig section. So the way we've done that with Unslashed Finance, one of our first adopters of us for insurance, is we do it in an optimistic way. So an insurer is able to make a claim, and then if no one disputes it, if no users on the platform dispute within a certain amount of time, so in the case of insurance that's usually 5 days, the insurer automatically gets their payout, whether it's right or wrong. That's how we keep things credibly neutral. So it's like so it settles optimistically, and we assume that it's true. The one asking for the claim actually has the grounds to do that, because the way we've calculated it is, if that's not the case, then there's more than enough time for anyone within the community to step in and create a dispute. And so finally, to tie that all together into the governance side of things, I'm going to read a bit from the blog post that was prepared for this. And so there are a couple of ways to go about it, because but with the main premise being of having a separation of powers, where it's not like the executive side or the core team can collude against the community, and vice versa, with the community colluding against the executive team. So kind of like how we have it in today's government, but in like a more decentralized way. So you can think of the community passing proposals as the legislative side. You can think of the core team as the executive side. But what's missing, and that's where we come in, is more often than not, there is no judicial side in when it comes to these. So it's either the core team gets what they want, the community gets what they want. And us at Kleros, we've experienced this firsthand with one of our other products, Proof of Humanity, that branched out and took a one person, one vote approach to governance. And then there ended up being a lot of political rallying within the community, like certain community members looking to get as many delegates as possible. So, yeah, not to say it was a failed experiment. We're still sticking with the one person, one vote thing, but it's definitely harder to have to account for those kind of things. Like we couldn't have predicted that one person in the community would end up becoming like a full-time politician trying to get as many votes as possible. And so in the case of governance decisions where there's friction,
Yeah.
like what you mentioned, we can be tapped as the independent judiciary. And of course, everything would be within compliance of the protocol's policy. So that's up to, for example, you guys would present policy on how decisions should be taken. Anyone within the Rook finance community can pass evidence to the jurors who are selected for the case. And since our jurors don't have any, since our jurors are credibly neutral, no interest for or against the protocol going into it, then it's reasonable to assume that they're gonna digest the evidence that's submitted. They're gonna look through the policy of the application and then make a credibly neutral ruling as to which side should ultimately win when there are cases of like a stalemate between the two parties, as you mentioned. So yeah, that's pretty much the summary. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. So a couple of questions. One, can you say a little bit more about the technical versus non-technical courts? Like what, given what well, I'll give you a little more information. So a lot of the things that we have a very complicated protocol because we work on MEV. So
Yeah.
a lot of the protocol is still under development and is under development very quietly. We're not really a protocol DAO. We're more of a, I guess what we govern is treasury and product integrations and things that require some treasury funds. And so we often have fairly complicated proposals, but often the proposals are, as I said, really about DeFi in one form or another and require some pretty deep knowledge of DeFi. And so what court within your system would that reside in? Or would it reside entirely in a separate court, or how, where, given what I've told you, which of your subcourts do you think we would interact with most productively?
Off the top of my head, the blockchain technical court would make the most sense. But the way our subcourts work is that's open for proposals. Like we could have a proposal, like if it ends up being a very specific use case, we can always make a governance proposal to add a new subcourt specifically for. And yeah, I've been reading earlier today through your documentation about Rook, and honestly, it was quite a challenge wrapping my head around it because of the whole MEV thing. And I have noticed that MEV has become a talking point, especially like the dark forest thing and everything as of late. So it is possible, although not a guarantee, but to have a court specializing in MEV because it's such like a controversial topic a lot of times. And so yeah, that side is possible. But from what we have now, blockchain technical would be the best way to go.
Okay. And what about treasury disputes, just within DAOs in general? Is that something that people have brought through your platform?
Treasury, that's basically how our on/finance integration works. And I think that still resides within the blockchain thing. But that's the thing. This is one of the subcourts that's likely to change because at the moment it's very DeFi specific. So it's assumed that jurors on this, like if they're knowledgeable enough to stake in blockchain general or blockchain technical, then they'd have a good enough grasp of DeFi concepts. But in terms of like maybe more real world insurance claims, that's probably one of the subcourts we may be adding in the near future, specifically for insurance.
Okay. And your the sortition process for how people are assigned to courts as jurors, like what do you take anything into account in that other than their accumulated stake tokens for being on the winning side of decisions? Is there anything, are they anonymous otherwise, or how does that selection work?
All right, so yeah, they are anonymous, and usually when I bring up the part of how one side wins over the other, there are some eyebrows raised because initially, yes, it is a majority wins type of situation,
Okay.
but that's exactly why we have an appeal system, because in a majority wins kind of environment, of course they're going to be the ones who are like, wait a minute, no, they shouldn't just win straight away because they have the majority. And so anyone can put a little bit, pay the appeal fee changes depending on the subcourt, but you can place down a bond basically, which is an appeal fee, and it goes into another round where additional jurors are drawn in. So let's say a dispute starts with five,
Yeah.
three are for the dispute, and two are against. And then part of the losing side is like, hey, this wasn't right, so they fund an appeal, and the amount of jurors goes up to, let's say, eight. And then this process can continue going on and on for as long as there is adequate evidence submitted by both sides for each new round.
So it's conditioned on new evidence and a new fee.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. But just, I guess, just to go back to the question of how a juror gets onto a jury for a specific thing. Like, is anything considered in that other than their being staked for that particular kind of court and their number of stake tokens? So in the algorithm that assigns people to,
Hmm.
that selects a jury, like, what if I were to bring you something and say, okay, here we have a dispute, we have these two parties, we need to figure this out, let's take this to the blockchain technical court. Like, what do I then say? We need a jury of 7, or we need a jury of 5, or we, like, who sets the parameters, and how are jurors selected within those parameters?
Oh, so yeah, there is nothing more to go off other than the fact that there's stake plus the amount of stake tokens. Although we are, because we're close to the launch of V2, and this is an area I'm not too caught up with yet on like the specific parameters for that, but there are changes made to the juror drawing process to
Okay.
make it more modular. And so even though I don't know too much about the specifics of V2 at the moment, I would say as an overall recommendation that for new integrations, we do recommend actually to hold off for V2, just
Hmm.
so there's no problems with like, so with how it's currently done versus how it's done in the future. There's no like migration errors or anything. But
That
yeah, for the time being, it is solely on the fact that they have stake in like through the general court and then the blockchain general court, and then it takes into account the amount of token stake.
okay. And do you have any sense of how that will work in V2, or the timing of V2?
Timing of V2, we're looking to September to October.
Okay.
So around the end of summer in Europe. So yeah.
Okay. And when you said making it more, that there's possibility to make it more modular, what does that mean?
Mhm. So okay, I'm gonna look through some of our recent update
This is very good to know. Thank you.
things. So all right, so as of the latest update, iterations of it are still in progress since yeah, since it's like an organization wide effort to work on like new drawing mechanisms. So we have our research team on it as well, and our engineering team. So it's still mostly a work in progress because we're also going multi-chain. So these parts definitely need to be sorted. I
Yeah.
can, however, send over the yellow paper, which I think has been recently updated, and there's a section in here about future plans, like directions we could take the new drawing process. And
It would be great. It's on your
so
site, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the updated one, but so this will be updated to reflect our final decision for which solution we end up going with.
Yeah, if you could send it to the Discord, that would be great.
Or, oh, sure.
Um, Thank you.
And yeah, I could get back to you on that actually sooner than later. I'll check in with some from the engineering team so I can give you like at least a good enough idea of which direction we're leaning on at the moment for which one to fully implement into V2.
Yeah, that would be great. And we're not, looking to make a decision tomorrow or anything. So your September, October timing is pretty good. That's fine for us. Because we're just starting down the path of exploring different options, and you guys came up as a pretty obvious one to think about. So, um, all right. Now, I guess one other question: how is there an initial bonding fee for the project? Like, where does that bonding fee come from? So, if we integrated with you on this, would that come from us, or would that come? Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah, actually, so that's on the application side.
Okay.
It's called the arbitration fee.
Yeah.
So anyone in your community or your organization, like if you see something that needs to be passed as a dispute, then you can fund the arbitration fee, and then like the PNK rewards would be done on our side.
Okay. And can you give me a ballpark of what those fees look like, or are they part of a larger contract, or how does the business side of it work?
Oh, typically, those aren't too much. Those range from what I've seen, like 630, 60, 120 US. So depending on like the subcourt and the application, that's usually the ballpark.
60 to 120 US?
30 to 120 US
60 to 120.
typically.
Okay.
From what I've seen so far, and that's the same goes on our deployment on XDAI. I mean, Gnosis chain around the area as well.
Okay.
So,
Okay, great.
this is also something a part of V2 is also to make that range a bit more extensible so we can take on like lower value disputes up to higher value disputes so that's why.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Okay, great. Well, I want to be not, cautious with your time. I really appreciate your taking time here. Is there anything we haven't asked about that you think we should know?
Oh yeah, I did also I brought this up for reference, which is our Kleros fellowship program.
Yeah.
It's our sixth cohort, and we've been doing this basically since launch. And so this is basically to give more confidence on the side of DAOs or applications looking to integrate with us in that jurors and to get a better understanding of the legal side of things internally. So we have a couple of different tracks. One is the policy drafting track, bankruptcy court track, escrow track, insurance track, and governance track. So these are all part of our current cohort.
Yeah.
I'll be sending this on Discord as well. So it is of great importance for us to improve the expertise basically of the ones who work on these sides, especially with our products like our governor product, like I mentioned, our escrow product. So more effort will be going into this going forward.
Oh, great. Yeah, I would love to read more about that. Okay, good. Well, do any of the people who've joined us have questions we haven't covered?
I do have one question. So, and I'm sure that you've got data and everything to back this up, but it seems like the whole slashing based on if you vote for the side that loses almost incentivizes people to just vote on what they think will win rather than what is necessarily correct. because if I know that there's politicking going on, and so I know that's, potentially, or there's something that may be more popular, to say that it's, party A is in the right, but party B is probably in the right based on the rules. If I think that everyone else is going to vote for party A, then I'm incentivized to vote for party A, even if they're not the right party. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. Actually, that was one of my concerns that like I brought up when I first joined with like why not, what if everyone just goes for the majority regardless of any evidence? But that's part of V2 as well, to implement a commit reveal scheme. So like there's no way of actually knowing which side is voting on which. And because of the random drawing process, the likelihood of the jurors in a given case being part of the same community where like they can collude would be quite unlikely. And that's why we're also taking more steps to that. So if we do see collusion like within our social channels, Discord, Telegram, we're developing a product called Kleros Moderate to like help censor the parts that need to be censored out, basically like obvious blatant collusion and stuff. So at the moment this problem is balanced out a bit by the appeal system, so there's always a chance to appeal no matter what the nature of the voting was in the first place, and there will always be more jurors coming in with every appeal. But to increase the safety of this, commit reveal is something we're pushing for V2.
Okay, great, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, unless there's anything else, we've hit 8:30. So I really appreciate it. It's heroic to do this at 8:30 at night your time. So I appreciate your willingness to work on time zones. This was fantastic. I'm sure we'll have some follow-up questions, so I'll reach out to you on Discord. And
Yeah, for sure.
Good.
And yeah, like I mentioned, I've been noting down some of your questions as well. I'll be bringing that internally. If I could get you an answer on those sooner than later.
Oh, great.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, Emmett. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And to be continued.
All right. For sure. Have a nice day, guys. Nice meeting you all.